Uh-oh. Cleet's struggling with the butter knife and the bottle top.
I never struggle. It's always a victory.
No. Good evening, everybody. Welcome back to the Abyss for some more spooky stories from online. Cleet, what are you drinking?
90-minute IPA from Dogfish Brewing. Pretty fantastic. I think the alcohol content's pretty high yet. We're looking at 9%, so we're going to be seeing clouds of drunkenness coming up.
Cleet's going to start seeing shit. Yeah, I'm running with an 801 Pilsner from Uinta Brewing Co. Got it at Costco, so you know it's here in Utah, it's 5%. So you're 4% above me. I might have to have 3 just to keep up.
Yeah, let's see it. See it, bitch.
But, whoa, coming at me with the bitch. So I wanted to kick things off with an awesome piece of fan mail we got, and this comes from Millbank, South Dakota.
I heard it was positive and negative.
I guess it was very positive, and then I guess just like I don't know, maybe a criticism or like a constructive piece of calling us out. But it starts with, thank you so much for the kind company while cleaning and for content that drags me out of my head. Heart emoji. I hope everything is going well for everyone.
That's sweet. That made me feel
very
happy.
Awesome.
Yeah,
I did like it. And thanks for listening to us while you clean. I'm glad we have content that drags you out of your head. And then the same day, second piece, also from Millbank, South Dakota, comes, almost everything you know about the Patterson-Gimlin film is wrong. LOL.
You know, I'll do some research on it, but I have seen documentaries on that, and there's a lot of good evidence that's real and evidence that it's not. Obviously, it's about the Bigfoot footage, a Bigfoot walking through the forest, and it's a little bit blurry. I don't even know the location there, but I did see some evidence on a documentary saying that the way the Bigfoot was moving was similar to how primates would move their body, because it's a little bit different than apes, it's a little bit different than humans. But also in that documentary, there was a man in that town that claimed that he was paid a certain amount of money to get into an ape suit to be filmed as Bigfoot. Those are the only 2 data points I really know outside of actually doing a deep dive on it. So,
okay, awesome. And then there was another comment that came from YouTube that I don't believe we called out, which is kind of cool. It also came from the same episode, the Sierra Sounds. If you haven't watched that or listened to that episode, go check it out. But this comes from Relatable Gaming 5855. This says, man, I just found y'all the other day, and y'all have become a key part of my daily drive. Definitely deserve more recognition. Keep it up, guys.
Shit, I didn't even see that. I'll have to go comment back. I didn't even see that comment. But yeah, welcome to the show. We're glad to have you. So let's fucking start tonight.
Let's do it. Yeah, we got a couple good comments on YouTube that I was like, damn, those are pretty good.
Pretty nice.
Pretty
Pretty
good.
nice.
So, like I mentioned earlier, we're jumping back to Reddit for more spooky stories or scary stories from online.
All right, this one is called I Think I Met a Serial Killer.
Me too. His name's Cleet.
You're probably right. Just kidding.
He has this weird look in his eye. Every time I insult him, he's getting closer and closer to killing me.
3 years, 8 months, 4 days. All right. Dated a guy whose father was a short-tempered and isolated man, also a truck driver and a skilled hunter.
Already, I think it's a serial killer. Already.
Yeah, known fact, truck drivers is the profession favored by serial killers. So he would come into a room with all of us laughing and say how much he wanted to strangle us.
What the fuck?
Carve our eyeballs out. And everyone would laugh and say, "Oh, Dad."
Oh my God.
Typical dad.
That's good old dad stuff right there.
Once for Thanksgiving, I was in the basement and he came down. Didn't know I was down there. I guess they meant he didn't know I was down there. Anyways, talking to himself about how to perfect the glaze. Lay it thick. How nobody would suspect it. That day, he wouldn't let anyone else cook. Didn't eat any of the food himself, and everyone in the house had diarrhea, stomach pains, and vomiting.
Oh my God.
Before I left for good, his dad took a truck driving job to be trained in Ohio, where we were in Illinois. Nobody heard from him for 2 weeks, but he called crying from Washington State, saying he lost his wallet and ID and needed help home and missed his family so much. Nobody asked any questions at all. They got him back. It stuck in the back of my mind how he started Uber driving that New Year's in the city, and there were a few stories of women that had gone missing around that time who were never seen again after getting into an Uber. Well, what do you think?
Welcome to my house. Thanks for coming over. You know what sounds fun? I really want to strangle the shit out of you.
I'm gonna make
Anyway,
perfect,
come on in.
Perfect glaze. It's gonna give you the worst diarrhea.
Think of Taco Bell, but worse. Dang. Yeah, that's a little intense. I would not want to be around that gentleman very long. Okay. So this story is titled, If You Don't Trust Your Gut, Trust Your Dog. I think that's a pretty good thing to live by.
Rough, motherfucker.
Yes, exactly. I, 25-year-old female, had an experience about 4 days ago that I have not been able to shake. I was dog and house sitting for my boyfriend, who's a 26-year-old male, while he was away on a backpacking trip. My boyfriend's home is in a semi-remote area at the bottom of a hill at the back of a few acres of property. He's right next to the highway, which is opposite to us, a small rural neighborhood. It's both very sketchy and very safe, meaning that the community is close, but the people frequently keep to themselves, and there are lots of abandoned and dilapidated homes right next to very well-kept homes. Talk about some curb appeal. A pretty typical countryside neighborhood, so I really didn't feel unsafe to agree to watch my boyfriend's property and his dog, Hennessy. It's a good dog name.
Yeah.
Hennessy is a 115-pound jet black American Bulldog and English Labrador mix. He's basically all muscle, and ever since my boyfriend and I began dating, he's become very protective of me and my own dog, Lottie.
I bet he's patriotic, too.
Probably. His American flag bandana. Lottie is a 57-pound poodle mix. I'm a dog groomer, so she's usually done up in a pretty silly haircut with bows and everything. All of this is to say that one of my dogs is very intimidating, and the other is not. Because of his strength, however, I cannot walk Hennessy and Lottie at the same time on my own, so I usually walk Lottie alone, then I go back and get Hennessy to walk him. We do about 30 minutes of walking each, and I like to take Hennessy after Lottie at night because I feel safer with him as it gets later. This is important because this was the case about 4 nights ago. I was about 3/4 of the way home through my walk with Lottie when I got this really weird feeling that I was being watched. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I looked around to see that about 30 feet or so back, there was a tall man in a hoodie standing next to an older, run-down home. I instantly thought the hoodie was weird. I live in Northern California, and it's early August. Doesn't get colder than 87 degrees in the evening, especially when the sun was still setting like it was at this time. I forced myself to brush it off, as I tend to be fairly paranoid due to my years of reading Let's Not Meet stories. As I kept walking, the sun kept setting and the streets began to slowly get darker. I would glance back from time to time and notice that the man was keeping pace with me, not breaking that 30-foot odd distance. If I turned a corner, so did he. If I sped up, so did he. Finally, we reached the highway and I crossed right before a car came speeding past, hoping that if the guy was following me, this would put some distance between him and myself, which it did. But that didn't stop him from continuing to follow me. I walked as fast as I could to the house, not wanting to turn around, but now being able to hear his footsteps on the gravel. At this point, Lottie had noticed him too and started to bark and growl. I forced her to keep moving and thankfully made it back inside the house, slamming and locking the door, hoping that was that, and that was the end of it. It was not. Moments after I'd shut and locked the door, I felt someone trying to open it. The dogs heard this too and started barking because they always do when someone is at the door. There's no peephole on my door, but I can talk to whoever's on the other side. It's pretty thin. So I yelled out and asked who was there. Through the barking, I could hear a man's voice. "I love your dog. Can I meet her?" For some reason, the way he said it was so creepy. It was like there was nothing behind it. Kind of like he'd rehearsed the line or decided to say it beforehand. I yelled back, "No," and I asked him to please go away. He paused for another second, and then said again, "I love your dog. Can I meet her?" He starts trying the door handle again, this time pushing up against the door. By this point, Hennessy can tell something is wrong, and so can Lottie. The hair on the back of Hennessy's neck is standing up, and he's mashing his teeth while growling. At this moment, I don't know what possessed me, but I threw Lottie into the bathroom behind me and grabbed Hennessy by the collar, keeping him close to the door with me. He's still barking, going crazy. I hear the man repeat that he wants to meet my dog, and I yelled out, "Leave!" He paused and then slammed into my door. I saw the door move, and at that moment I unlocked the door and opened it just wide enough that Hennessy could get about halfway out. He's going bonkers at this point. My hand is starting to hurt from holding him back. I can hear his teeth clacking as he ferociously chomps towards the man. Well, this dude was not expecting Hennessy. He stumbled back, almost falling over, and cursed as he scrambled to stay off the ground. He didn't even look at me and instead booked it up the hill as fast as he could, out of sight. I managed to pull Hennessy back in, called the cops to tell them what had happened. Never got a good look at the guy, and they basically told me that there was nothing they could really do. But they did take my statement and told me they'd contact me if anything ever came about. I'm so thankful for Hennessy. After all that, I snuggled up with him and Lottie that night and cried because it hit me how terrifying that was. I literally was out the next day and bought him the biggest bone I could find from a pet store, nearly an hour away, because he'd earned it. I don't know why this creep didn't get the hint when I had two dogs barking inside, but my assumption is that he didn't really realize he was hearing two barks, or assumed that if I had two dogs, they were both like my puffy poodle. So that's to say he wasn't afraid. So there you go.
That's some good heading.
This is big old freaking American bulldog busting out of the door at you, clacking its teeth. They're like, nope. Then again, I also wouldn't be following a woman home, so, you know.
This one is titled, I Was Attacked, but I don't remember anything about it. Let me start by saying the story I'm about to share happened almost exactly 4 years ago. And there are a lot of things I do not remember, so some of the information was told to me by others after the fact. That being said, everything is true and really did happen to me. I apologize ahead of time as I know it will be quite lengthy. In 2020, during the pandemic, I had just moved into a really cool, old second-floor apartment on my town square. It was the first time I think I had ever lived completely alone my entire life, and I was truly in love with the place. One day, in late July, I had left to go shopping and had locked my apartment, something my mother had practically pounded into me since my childhood. I never left my doors and windows unlocked. When I got home from shopping, I noticed a few things weren't where I thought I had left them, and I mentioned this to my cousin, Michelle. I told her I thought someone might have been in my apartment when I was gone. After discussing it with her, we came to the conclusion that I must have just forgotten, and I had moved the items myself and didn't think about it again. A couple nights later, I was up watching scary movies until about 2 in the morning when I decided to get ready for bed. I remember walking into my bathroom to change into my PJs and do my nightly routine. That is the last thing I remember until I woke up the next day. When I got out of bed, I immediately noticed something wrong with my clothes I had on. They were those PJ shorts that had the drawstrings around the waist. I always tied the drawstrings to make them fit, but when I stood up, the drawstrings looked like they had been broken. They were still tied and were practically falling off of me. I told myself I must have moved around a lot in my sleep and the string must have snapped or something. I headed to the bathroom for my morning routine. When I walked by my bathroom mirror, I turned to look at myself and I didn't see anything wrong, but I felt really weird. Out of the sorts, I guess you'd say, even more so than usual after I first wake up. The longer I was awake, the stranger I started to feel. I noticed I had a headache and my vision was kind of blurry. I went to grab my phone from my nightstand to check what time it was, but I guess I had forgotten to charge it before going to bed because my phone was dead. I took my phone to the living room and found the charger and plugged it in. I stood there and waited for my phone to come on. When it finally did come back on, I was in complete shock to find it was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. This was highly unusual for me because no matter what time I go to bed, I usually wake up around 7 or 8 in the morning. This is when I began to feeling slightly panicked. Like I said, this was not normal for me. I began rubbing my face and my hands, and that's when I felt something was wrong with my face. I ran back to the bathroom mirror. This time, when I looked in the mirror, I discovered my vision was so blurry that I couldn't even see my face, no matter how close I got to the mirror. It looked like a dense fog, or like when you take a super hot shower and the mirror fogs over, except that I haven't had run any hot water at all. This is when I realized something was very, very wrong with me. I was disoriented and confused. I walked back into my living room to check to see if my phone had charged enough so I could call a family member or friend to come over. The phone was only at 5%, but I decided I'd just keep it plugged in and try to call Michelle or my son. I picked the phone up and then stared at it. I could not remember how to use my phone to call or text anyone. I knew that I knew how to use my phone, but for some reason I did not have the ability. I was beginning to get very upset and scared, but most of all frustrated because I knew that I knew how to use the phone, but my brain would not register it at all. Soon after this, a flood of messages and missed calls came through, and I was finally able to text a friend and told them I was having some sort of emergency and needed him to contact my sister to get someone to my apartment ASAP. My sister lives in an independent living facility because she was born with CP and cannot walk. She relies on a wheelchair to get around, and I knew she would not be able to physically help me, but would get a hold of my son. I was becoming more confused the longer I was awake. My sister had gotten a hold of my son, and he was on his way. I thought I should probably go downstairs to unlock the door to the stairway, but I was feeling so strange and off balance that I sat on the steps and inched my way down, unlocked the door. It was already unlocked, and in my confusion, I actually locked the door. I went back upstairs the way I went down, by sitting and inching my way back up. Soon, I received a call from my son, telling me the door was locked and he could not go inside, so I had to repeat the entire process all over again. I opened the door and my son, along with his girlfriend and my 7-month-old granddaughter, took one look at me, his eyes widened in shock, and he said, "Jesus Christ, Mother, what happened to your face?" I had no idea what he was talking about. I went back to my bathroom mirror and discovered a horrific sight. I had a goose egg in the middle of my forehead, the size of a tennis ball, and my right eye was completely swollen shut, and I had one hell of a black eye. My left eye was partially swollen as well. It certainly explained why I had slept for 14 hours straight, all the confusion, the headache, and the blurry vision I was experiencing. I informed my son of everything that I had done that I remembered since going to bed the night before, but I did leave out the fact that the drawstring on my shorts had been broken. Michelle also showed up and told me I needed to go to the ER and get checked out as we kept discovering other injuries on me beside just a goose egg and a black eye. I had bruises in the shape of large fingerprints on my upper arms. They were not my own. I'm a tiny 5 foot tall and only weigh about 117 pounds. It sort of looked like someone had been standing in front of me, facing me, and had grabbed my arms to shake me or something. Then we noticed I had red marks around both of my wrists and both of my ankles. I also had rug burn type injuries on my shins and knees. I was still very confused, and I had absolutely no memory of what took place in those 14 hours as I was sleeping. It's just nothingness, a black hole in my memory. Even when I try to remember now, which I don't force, but I do think about the occasion. I was taken to our local hospital's ER, which is really nothing more than a glorified Band-Aid station. The nurse practitioner on call kept asking me what happened, even though I kept telling her I had no idea. Maybe I fell or something. She then asked if I was in a relationship with someone, and I informed her I was single and was not seeing anyone at the time. She did not believe me, and had the nurse call the police. I was confused, so I get why she didn't believe me, but then she said, "Well, if you don't remember, that happened, there's not much I can do, but I can tell you with 100% certainty that you did not cause these injuries. Somebody did this to you." The police never came in to talk with me, and I was discharged into the care of Michelle. I couldn't be left alone due to my condition, so it was arranged that I would be staying the night with Michelle and Aunt Kay. I was told if I started getting nauseous or began vomiting, or my confusion and headache got worse, to call the ambulance immediately. That's what ended up happening about 2 hours later. I was horribly dizzy and had tried to eat something because by this time it had been over 24 hours since I had eaten anything. They got me something to eat and I began hallucinating. At first, it was just auditory hallucinations. I was sitting with my aunt in her bed watching TV when all of a sudden I noticed that the movie that they were watching had completely different dialogue that I didn't remember being in this particular movie. Then, characters in the movie began speaking directly to me. I don't remember what they were saying, and I kept glancing between the TV to my aunt to see if she was hearing the same thing I was. I was totally aware that I was hallucinating, but I had absolutely no control over it. Then the paranoia started. My daughter called to check on me. She lives in a different town, and even though I was on the phone with her, I was convinced she, along with several other family members, were all outside of the house, talking about me. That's when I started vomiting and my cousin dialed 911. When the ambulance showed up, the police also showed up and they were talking to my cousin. When they asked me what hospital I wanted to go to, I told them the name of my cousin, who knew me very well, knew I would never ask to go to this particular hospital, a story for another time. However, because I seemed with it enough to the paramedics, I kept insisting that it was where I wanted to go. That's where they had to take me. I wish now that they had listened to her, because it was incredibly late at night and the hospital I was taken to was 25 minutes away. No one in my family met me at the hospital, and the hospital did not even try to call my family for information. I don't remember what I did or what I said to anyone after that. I was so confused and hallucinating that it must have been as bad as I was committed to the hospital psych floor over a traumatic brain injury for 11 days. 11. Also another story for another time. Maybe I'll write a part 2 to this because it's already been incredibly long. I still to this day have no recollection of what happened to me, but I really don't want to remember, seeing as all the medical professionals and my own healthcare providers who saw my injuries say that I had to have been attacked by someone. It's scary to think of all the possibilities. Was someone actually hiding in my house that night without me knowing? Could it have been one of those carnival workers I saw walking around the town square earlier that day? Worst yet, was it someone I know and still have in my life now? I'm not sure, which is worse, not knowing at all, or having memories of it forever. If you have read the entire post, thank you. I've been very reluctant to share this story, but I also find writing out all the details I do remember to be very therapeutic in a way.
God damn. This one is called Alone at the Campsite. In the summer of 2022, I was desperate and frustrated. I'd quit my job a few months prior in the pursuit of my own startup, and my business wasn't exactly thriving. After 6 years of IVF treatment, my wife had blessed me with a daughter earlier that year, and while I was elated to be a father, the stress of being a dad, the financial pressures from the clinic, and the weight of being the sole provider for my family had taken a significant toll in the recent months. As summer approached, I decided I needed a weekend away to clear my head and get back into the grind. I decided to take a 2-night trip, just me and our dogs, to a lake off an old logging road about 3 hours from home. It was one of my favorite spots, and I knew the woods there quite well. I packed my things, leashed the dogs, 2 blue heelers, and set out early one Tuesday morning. When I got to the trailhead, the parking lot was completely empty. Middle of the week, I was stoked to be alone. There was a single deer path up a canyon about 1,200 feet over 5 miles to get to the lake, and neither myself nor the dogs met anyone else on the trail the entire way up the mountain. I got to take the lake around midday, spent the afternoon fishing and collecting wood and water for the coming night. The lake was pristine and quiet, not a soul in sight. I was truly alone aside from the dogs. I found a flat spot on the east side of the lake where the vegetation cleared and I could set up a tent. I made a small camp about 30 yards from the trail. I would have preferred to go further up the mountain, but it was still early in the season, and when I got to my campsite, the rest of the trail was too snow-packed to continue any further. As it was, I had to navigate over several hard-packed embankments before I got to the suitable area. The icy slush was difficult to navigate, even for the dogs. When we had finally crushed our way over and through a few hundred yards, I made the decision that we'd be going no further. Set up my tent, hung my pack on a limb, and took my fishing pole back in the direction I'd come. I spent the evening catching and cooking fish at the edge of the spillway, and as the sun began to set, the dogs and I made our way back to the tent. Slipping over wet stumps and clumsily pushing through the snow, I stumbled into camp exhausted and ready for a fire. As I approached the site, I realized some things were out of place. My pack, which had been hung on a limb, was sitting neatly on the other side of the clearing, roughly 20 feet from where I had left it. Sitting on top of it was a large eagle feather. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. The dogs began a low growl, but as they circled the site, there was no one there. As I approached my tent, a stick had been used to carve an inscription into the dirt outside of the entrance. It was 2 U's, one upside down, connected to the other by a thin line, and then further connected by another line to a larger U shape. I would describe it as a Native American petroglyph in the shape of a bird or an eagle. Uniform, symmetrical, and above all things, fresh. Someone had been here. Someone neither I nor 2 very distrusting dogs had seen, heard, nor smelled. Someone who had left no footprints through the snow and mud. Someone who had not passed us on the trail, or whose car had been parked at the trailhead. My stomach dropped. I felt a presence of being watched, but I couldn't tell from where. I quickly built a huge campfire and with dread watched as the last of the sunlight sank below the ridge. That night was a fever dream. Pulling the dogs into the tent with me, I clung to my knife and flashlight, praying that whatever was watching me would leave. It didn't. Throughout the night, I was periodically awoken to a variety of sounds. Yells, shrieks, the snapping of branches. The dogs would sit up, growl, and bark until I would open the screen of the tent and shine my light into the forest. At one point, I had just drifted off to sleep when the dog's low growl woke me up. Thinking I might have the drop on whatever this was, I slowly unzipped the tent and leaned out with my flashlight. Taking a breath, I clicked it on. Standing just 3 feet from me was a doe and her calf. I scanned across her. An entire herd was in the sight. As my dogs lost it, the deer spooked and sprinted back into the forest. A crushing and trampling noise of several dozen deer evacuated the area. As it faded, I heard laughter. The deep laughter of a man turned to crying as it escalated, then sobbing, and then to deep growling, much more boisterous than anything my dogs could make, or even a bear would produce. I held the dogs tightly. Sleep eluded me for the rest of the night, and as soon as the sun peeked into the valley, I packed my shit and I left. I've never been so terrified in my life. What the fuck? Just like laughing, then crying, and then growling.
Yeah, seems like my typical Tuesday night.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's normal for you.
Oh yeah, completely. This one is called "The Night I Slept in My Car and Woke Up to a Stalker, Drunk and Alone in St. Louis." Come on, we've all been there. All right.
Yeah.
So I had zero intention of sleeping in my car that night. I was out with some friends in downtown St. Louis, bar hopping. Just enjoying the night, you know. But then I lost track of how much I had been drinking. By the time it hit me, I was too hammered to drive. But I didn't want to blow money on a hotel or figure out an Uber back to the suburbs. So I made the dumb decision to sleep it off in my car. I ended up parking in this small, mostly empty lot near the riverfront. It seemed quiet enough, no sketchy vibes, at least at first. My car's old sedan, not exactly built for comfort, but I tried to make the back seat work. Grabbed a ratty sweatshirt from the trunk to use as a pillow, cracked the windows just enough for the air. The streetlights were flickering above, giving off a weird, eerie glow. But I was too tired and too buzzed to take care. Eventually, I drifted off, but at around 2 a.m., I woke up to this tapping on my window. My first thought, great, a cop's gonna bust me for sleeping here. But nope, it wasn't a cop. I squint out of the window, and there's this figure standing there, right up against the glass. The light from the street barely hit them, just enough to make out the shape of someone in a hoodie, standing way too close to my car for comfort. I tried to play it cool, thinking maybe they'd go away if I didn't react, but then they started circling the car, slowly dragging their fingers along the glass. My heart was pounding. They stopped at the driver's side door, and I hear them try the handle. Thank God I locked it. Then they moved to the back window, where I was lying, and pressed their face against the glass. I couldn't see their face clearly, just the shadowy outline of eyes staring right at me. I didn't move, barely breathe, just hoping they'd get bored and leave. After what felt like forever, they stepped back, but I didn't hear them walk away. I stayed frozen, trying to figure out if they were still there. Finally, I worked up the nerve to sit up and peek out the windshield, and there they were, standing like 10 feet in front of my car, just staring, not moving. I don't even remember grabbing my keys, but suddenly I had them, hands shaking, as I started the car. The second the headlight flickered on, they bolted, running off into the darkness. I didn't stick around to see where they went. I just floored it out of there, driving until I found a busy, well-lit gas station where I stayed the rest of the night. Doors locked, headlights on, wide awake. The next day, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Even now, whenever I drive past the part of town, I catch myself glancing in the rear view mirror, half expecting to see that figure again, lurking in the shadows.
It's just why you don't sleep in your car, I guess.
I do it all the time.
Take that Uber home. Take the Uber. I don't know why I get all the story about dogs. I saw something camping. No one believes me but my dogs. I promise, this is a true story. No one seems to believe me, but I can't explain it otherwise. I feel like if you start a story that way, I don't know.
Maybe it's
a little
extra.
bit of credibility.
It's extra true, man.
Extra true. Okay,
This
we'll go
sounds
with
fake.
that.
This sounds fake, but it's not.
It's not. I promise, it's not fake. Stay with me. I was out camping in the mountains when I was about 11 years old. It was this small open area deep in the forest, surrounded by trees. It was a family trip that included my sister, parents, grandparents, cousin, and a few friends and their parents. So it was 2 tents and 1 RV. My family slept in one tent that had a side connected to the tent that my dog slept in. Man, they have a dog tent with a toilet tent nearby.
They got tents for everything. They got a cooking tent, toilet tent,
football tent,
torture tent.
Oh yeah, sex tent.
Yeah.
My friends in there, I guess it's called the red tent. My friends and their parents had a tent behind ours. My grandparents and cousins slept in the RV. There were 12 of us in total, including myself. Other than us, there was only one other RV that also had a dog and another tent with a couple of rows down. It was a fairly big campsite, so there was a lot of distance between us, and my family was closest to the woods. Not so close that we could see into it, but close enough that we could see about 5 feet past the tree line. It was a 2-week trip, and we had 5 days left before going home. It was about 3 a.m., and I was still awake. I had forgotten my insomnia medicine at home and had slept till 2 that afternoon, so we're dealing with insomnia, so already super credible. I had to use the bathroom, but was also too scared to go out alone, so I woke my dad up. He didn't want to leave the tent, but promised to watch from the windows until I came back inside. So I grabbed a lamp and went outside to the toilet tent. Once inside, I closed myself in and I turned off my lamp, a habit I have so that bugs aren't attracted to the lamp inside the tent, so no one can see me in there. It wasn't even a minute later that the dogs, who were in the tent next to the bathroom, started barking and growling like nuts. Now, these two never barked or growled except when someone came close to the tent, or that one time geese were passing between the tents and it scared them. It was late, and I could hear nobody outside. My dad started yelling for them to shut up, but they just got louder, and our golden retriever, who wouldn't hurt a fly, started to bark this scary bark. Our other dog was growling like he was about to attack something. It was scary to hear. I was scared, but wanted to know if there was something outside I needed to yell for my dad about. So I opened up the entrance just slightly to see what was out there. I looked straight out into the woods to see if another animal was there, but I couldn't see anything. But then, to the left of where I was looking, something moved behind the trees. Once my eyes focused on it, I could see this large figure, much bigger than what a human could be at this distance, walking across the tree line, not coming into the camp, but walking past it. Its arms looked like they were dragging on the ground, and it looked like it had this long snout coming from its face. Its eyes were reflecting the light from the RV across the way, making its eyes glow a scary red color. Not buying it. Not buying it. It also looked to have these huge antlers on its head, and moved in almost a smooth way. Smooth is where it looks unnatural and like it was kind of floating there. Finally, my dad started shouting for the dogs to shut up and open the side of the tent that connected to the dog's tent, causing the dogs to run into the main tent. The creature seemed to not react to the commotion, but did turn to walk back into the woods away from our area. As it moved away, the dogs started calming down, their barking stopped, and it started to growl like nothing happened. It took me 5 minutes after seeing the dogs leaving to feel my heart beating. My dad called to ask if I was okay, and I said yes, and went back inside, but I couldn't sleep at all that night. In the morning during breakfast, I told everybody what I had seen, but nobody believed me. My dad said I was probably seeing things from how tired I was, or was seeing a deer in the dark, just missed how it looked. After breakfast, me and the kids my age, aka all the kids but one cousin, went to the tree line where I saw the creature a few hours before. The area I saw it walking had hoof prints in the dirt, and some signs of something dragging. Further into the trees, there was this one tree that had these huge gashes in it that was obviously fresh and unnatural. My dad said it was probably a deer rubbing its antlers in the tree, but it obviously wasn't. I refused to use the bathroom at night after that and just pissed my pants. Just kidding. And struggled to sleep even more. 2 days later, me and my friends got my dad to go with us further into the tree line. I wanted to see if there were any other signs something had been there. As we walked into the tree line, we showed my dad the marks, but the tracks had faded. Dad said it looked like a coyote had dug its claws into the tree. As we walked deeper, it got darker. My dad told us to wait and stay where we were. He continued forward on his own. After 5 minutes, he came back and said we were going back to camp. And after returning, he told us he had found 2 more trees marked the same way as the one we showed him, and a dead fox. He said the strangest thing wasn't the fox wasn't eaten or anything, but it had been marked like the trees. A large portion of its side had been ripped off and tossed further away from it. He looked disturbed, but it said it was probably a coyote who got into a fight and ended up leaving it. That's when I knew what I saw was real.
This one was called I Was Almost Kidnapped or Murdered?
Question mark?
A few months ago, I left my friend's house at around 3 or 4 in the morning. I was 17 and drove a very recognizable blue car with stickers on the back. As I was on the road leading to my neighborhood, I realized that this car behind me had been there for a very long time. It was a bigger white car, and their brights were on so I couldn't see who was inside. I got extremely suspicious and decided to drive past my neighborhood and into a different one. I turned left into the neighborhood and then made a right turn. They were still behind me. I made another right turn and another until I was out of the neighborhood. I made an extremely sharp right turn back into that neighborhood, and this white car made the exact same moves that I did. I was so scared and afraid to look away from the road for even 1 second, so I didn't grab my phone to call the police. Convenient. I've been to this neighborhood a couple of times, and I knew that it had some dead ends for resident driveways. I was terrified I would end up in one. I made a bunch of crazy turns and pressed on the gas, trying so hard not to panic or turn into a dead end. I lost sight of them for a second. I quickly parked my car between 2 others that were parked, and I ran out of the car into the dark area between 2 houses, where I sat behind a bush, crying and shaking. I waited a while before I got up and walked around the neighborhood with stealth until the coast was clear. I knew they would recognize my car, and I didn't know what would happen if I was still inside. Did I do the right thing? Is there a better way to prevent this?
The last story of the evening is called Almost Snatched by a Dirty Man in a Clean Car. I was 8. My sister was 5. We got it in our heads to walk home from school instead of waiting for our parents. They were late. It was a pretty rural area back then, and we were enjoying the sun and feeling grown up when a silver sedan slowed down by us. A man with a mostly bald head, black gloves, and a big smile leaned over and swung the passenger door out. We had to step around it. He said that our mom was sick, and he was sent to come pick us up. I started to get a bad feeling. I'd never seen this man before. He said, "It's okay. Get in. Do you like candy?" He gestured to a small pile of Halloween candy on his burgundy seat. His eyes were on my sister. He only glanced at me. I took my sister's hand and I tugged her along while saying no, like my dad had taught me. He started backing up, keeping his door open. He told us to get in the car over and over again. The smile was gone, and I will never forget the way his gloved hand squeezed the steering wheel. He shouted at us to get in the fucking car. I was starting to cry as I was beyond scared. That's when he tried to grab my sister. I yelled at her to run, and we did. The maniac actually kept backing his car up. There were only fields and abandoned lots. I heard him slam on the brakes, and I knew we had to hide. I pulled my sister over this old wooden driveway-like thing built over a ditch and into the old abandoned lots. It was severely overgrown. I pulled my sister down onto the ground in some really tall grass. She was crying, and I put my finger to my lips and she got quiet. We stayed hiding on our stomachs while I heard the sounds of a car door closing and footsteps walking through the gravel on the side of the road, swearing. More footsteps. A passing car, a car door closing, an engine, and a car driving through the gravel. We stayed and stayed. I felt frozen. I was so scared, and after a few more cars whizzed by, I slowly raised up my head. He was gone. We ran home, our hands glued together. We made it home, and that was the most terrifying day of my life. I like how at the end they said, "Oh, and my mom wasn't sick," as if we needed to
Yeah.
know that was the case.
She clearly wasn't sick, so.
Oh, yeah. Just so everyone's not worried about my mom. She wasn't sick. She was scared.
Yeah, she's okay.
All right, so that's going to wrap it up for tonight. As always, a huge thank you to our paid supporters of the show. Modelo Time, Cleat Feet, Curtis and Laura,
Nice.
Mothman, Devin, Laura, Conklin family, and Lou. Thank you very much for your support of the show. It tremendously helps us out. And if you want to become a supporter of the show, click the link below in the description. There's several tiers to choose from, and every one of them helps us out tremendously.
And if you're listening to us on YouTube, please like, share, and subscribe, as it really helps us get us out there. And as always, thank you for entering the abyss.
Until next time, Cleat overdoses on melatonin.